Okay, thank you for joining me for today's webinar on infant feeding in the Child and Adult Care Food Program. Certificates will be emailed out to everyone who is registered for this webinar. If you should have any questions as we go through today's presentation, please type them into the question box. I'll be compiling all of the questions and I'll email out the questions and answers to everyone sometime next week. All right, so institutions operating the Child and Adult Care Food Program that have infants enrolled in their child care must offer the CACFP to the infants in their care, and the meals and snacks offered to the infants must comply with the CACFP infant meal pattern requirements. Infant feeding is often a little more complex than feeding children because infants don't eat on a strict schedule. Different infants are ready for different foods at different ages, and parents can often be more particular about which foods their infants are eating. Today we're going to talk about some newer infant feeding training materials developed by the USDA. We're also going to go over the infant meal pattern in detail and talk about how to accurately document infant feeding to satisfy state and federal requirements. USDA developed a relatively new guide on feeding infants in the CACFP. It's a great resource for anyone feeding infants in their program. It covers topics including the infant meal pattern, developmental readiness, hunger and fullness signs, handling and storage of breast milk and infant formula, solid foods, creditable items, and also includes ideas and tools for communicating with parents, practice scenarios, food safety tips, tips for making your own baby foods, and more. And for any of you that are responsible for training other staff on infant feeding, USDA has developed 10 PowerPoint presentations that go along with this guide that you can use to train staff on these topics, as well as 5 additional videos, 2 games to help participants test their knowledge, and pre- and post-tests as well. This is a brief overview of today's agenda. We'll go over the infant meal pattern in detail, including which foods are creditable and non-creditable in the CACFP infant meal pattern, as well as dealing with food allergies and intolerances. Lastly, we'll go over how to document infant feeding to be compliant with CACFP regulations. Okay, let's get started. So the infant meal pattern is broken up into 2 age groups. The first age group is age birth through 5 months, and the second age group is 6 months of age through 11 months. In CACFP, parents are allowed to bring in 1 component from home, and you can still claim that meal or snack for reimbursement. So, for example, if mom brings in breast milk or formula, then you need to provide all of the solid foods offered. Or if dad brings in a homemade baby food component, such as carrots, then the center must provide the iron-fortified infant formula and all of the other solid food components. Some parents will want to bring in more than 1 component. For example, they may be breastfeeding and making their own homemade baby food. Or perhaps you have parents that are bringing in their own brand of formula and they want their baby to have only organic foods, which you may not be able to afford to provide. In cases like these, have the parent write a dated note stating that they do not want their child to participate in the Child and Adult Care Food Program and keep it on file. And remember, for any kids that do not participate in CACFP, do not include them in your CACFP free, reduced, and paid roster, and do not include them in your CACFP meal counts. So the meal pattern for infants age birth through 5 months consists of only 1 component, which is breast milk and/or iron-fortified infant formula for all meals and snacks. This is because the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends delaying the introduction of solid foods until 6 months of age. Most infants are not developmentally ready for solids until 6 months old, and introducing solids before they're developmentally ready can increase the risk of choking. Research has also shown that introducing solids too early can increase the risk of obesity later in life. Remember, the meal pattern lists the minimum serving sizes that you are required to offer. You can always serve more than the minimum serving size. You are required to serve solid foods once an infant is ready to accept them. Because all infants develop at different rates, you may have an infant that is developmentally ready for solids before reaching 6 months of age. A written note from the parent or guardian stating that his or her infant should be served solid foods is recommended as best practice in this situation. As we just saw, the only meal pattern component for infants in the birth through 5 months of age group is breast milk or formula. Remember, parents can bring in one component and you can still claim that meal or snack. So if there's only one component to the meal pattern and mom or dad brings it in, such as breast milk, that's absolutely fine. You can still claim that meal or snack. In addition, if mom breastfeeds on site, you can claim that meal or snack for reimbursement as well. Because USDA recognizes the time and energy it takes to produce breast milk and how important it is for baby's health, you are allowed to offer less than the minimum required serving size of breast milk at a meal or snack if you know that the infant will only consume a smaller amount at one time and you offer the rest of that minimum serving size a little later on when the infant is ready for it. Remember to document the entire amount of breast milk offered for this meal or snack over the course of the 2 feedings. Of course, you also want to remember food safety when dealing with breast milk. The infant feeding guide has a lot of helpful information regarding breastfeeding, including benefits for mom, baby, and families, how to support and encourage breastfeeding families, how to create a welcoming, breastfeeding-friendly environment, and it also contains important information and tips for the safe handling and storage of breast milk. In regards to infant formula, you are required to offer one brand of iron-fortified infant formula, and it can be whatever brand you choose. Since parents can bring in one component, they can choose to bring in the brand of infant formula that they like if it differs from the kind that you provide, as long as it's iron-fortified and regulated by the FDA. It's important to note that, unlike breast milk, you are required to offer at least the full minimum serving size of infant formula at each meal and snack in order to claim reimbursement. The Infant Feeding Guide has information regarding purchasing and preparing infant formula, tips for bottle feeding babies, as well as the safe handling and storage of infant formula. All right, here's the scenario. Mom is not able to provide you with enough breast milk to meet her infant's needs, and she wants the breast milk to be supplemented with iron-fortified infant formula. She doesn't want to use the brand that you provide. She wants to provide both the breast milk and the formula. If she does, is the meal still reimbursable? Yes. Because breast milk and formula are technically the same component, the parent can provide both breast milk and iron-fortified infant formula, and you can claim that meal or snack for reimbursement. The second infant age group in the CACFP infant meal pattern is the 6 to 11-month-old age group. This is the age when we start introducing solid foods. Typically, infants are ready to start eating solid foods when they can sit in a chair with good head control, open their mouth for food, move food from a spoon into the throat, and when they've doubled in weight. It's really important that you don't start solid foods too early. Introducing solid foods too early can increase the risk of choking, drinking less breast milk or formula needed for growth, and obesity later in life. However, you also don't want to start solid foods too late because introducing solid foods too late can increase the risk of not getting enough nutrients, especially iron and zinc. not growing normally, rejecting foods when they're given at a later age, delayed motor development, and, interestingly, delaying introduction of solids has not been proven to reduce the risk of developing food allergies as previously thought. The Infant Feeding Guide includes information on best practices for introducing new foods to babies, communicating with parents about trying new foods, how to feed solid foods to babies, signs of hunger and fullness, introducing different textures of food based on babies' feeding skills, buying baby foods, and preparing foods in different textures. You want to be in constant communication with parents regarding introducing solid foods and introducing new foods in general. Parents are the boss when it comes to when to start introducing solid foods and when to try new, different foods. Notice on the infant meal pattern for the older age group that the serving size for all solid foods starts at 0 tablespoons. USDA recognizes that every baby is different. Different babies are ready for different foods at different times, and even the same baby may accept one food today but refuse it tomorrow. The serving sizes for solids start at 0 tablespoons for this age group to account for these differences. That way, you're still meeting the meal pattern if an older infant is not yet ready for solids or refuses to eat a food that they had previously accepted. So here's another scenario. You have an 8-month-old infant at your center or home daycare that you feel is developmentally ready for solid foods. However, the parents do not want the infant to be introduced to solid foods. What do you do? So this is a really tricky situation. Nobody likes to see a child go hungry. You can tell the parents the signs you're seeing that make you feel that their infant is ready for solids. You can tell them perhaps that their infant is sitting up with good head control, that they're opening their mouth for food and wanting foods like the other older infants. You can educate them about the latest research on introducing solid foods. You can tell the parents or guardians that, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, 6 to 8 months of age is often referred to as a critical window for initiating the introduction of solid foods to infants. In addition, by 7 to 8 months of age, infants should be consuming solid foods from all food groups, including vegetables, fruits, grains, protein foods, and dairy. You can encourage them to talk with their pediatrician. However, when it comes to infants, the parent is the boss regarding what solid foods are offered when, and ultimately has the authority to make this decision. If they still tell you not to serve solid foods, then you do not serve solid foods. In this case, it's best practice to ask the parents for a note specifying their wishes, not only for your protection and peace of mind, but also to document your compliance with the meal pattern if a reviewer was on site wondering why an older infant that really seems developmentally ready for solids is not being served solid foods. The meal pattern for breakfast, lunch, and supper for this infant age group consists of 3 components. The first is breast milk or formula. The second is fruit or a vegetable or a combination of both. And the third is a grain or a meat alternate or a combination. Now remember from the previous slide, the meal pattern starts with a serving size of 0 tablespoons for solid foods to account for different stages of developmental readiness. So, an older infant breakfast in CACFP may consist of all 3 components, 2 components, or just 1, depending on the developmental readiness of that particular infant. Now, I want to point out something really important regarding the older infant's meal pattern, specifically at mealtimes. We see this mistake a lot when we're out on review. Okay, and then this is in regards to breakfast, lunch, and supper. I want you to notice that for the grain item at mealtime, it says infant cereal specifically. It doesn't give you any other options for grain items. It does not say crackers, does not say bread, it does not say pasta. It only says infant cereal. Therefore, if you're going to serve a grain at mealtime and you want that grain item to credit as part of your reimbursable meal, it must be iron-fortified infant cereal. Even if the infant is eating everything that the older kids are eating, if you're going to serve a grain at mealtime and you want the grain item to credit toward the meal pattern, it has to be the iron-fortified infant cereal. This seems to be an issue as infants get older and do start eating and wanting to eat the food that's being served to the older kids. Now, you'll notice on the meal pattern that you can serve iron-fortified infant cereal, or you can serve a meat alternate, or both. So, if you've got an older infant who's ready for and prefers to eat what the older kids are eating, or maybe you know they don't like or won't eat the iron-fortified infant cereal, make sure that you're serving a creditable meat alternate at meal times. Then, even if you serve a different grain than iron-fortified infant cereal in addition to the other creditable components, you'll still be meeting the meal pattern requirements by serving that meat alternate. All right, here's another scenario. Little Johnny is 7.5 months old. He's been eating iron-fortified infant cereal at meal times for about a month now. When his guardian drops him off today, he tells you not to serve Johnny any more iron-fortified infant cereal because he says it's making Johnny constipated. You know that the parent is the boss when it comes to offering foods, but you also know that in order to claim infant meals for reimbursement, you must serve the iron-fortified infant cereal and or a meat alternate. So what are you going to do in this situation? You've got a few different options. You could ask his parent or guardian to get a doctor's note stating that Johnny cannot have the iron-fortified infant cereal and what grain items he should be served instead. Now, you don't want to serve those alternate grain items and claim the meal for reimbursement until you get that doctor's note. Or you could simply replace the grain, the iron-fortified infant cereal, with a meat alternate, as we just talked about. However, if you don't have a doctor's note and for some reason can't replace that grain with a meat alternate, do not claim Johnny's meal for reimbursement if you're going to serve a different grain than iron-fortified infant cereal. Now let's talk about the meal pattern for the older infants at snack. The older infant age group is the only age group in all of CACFP that has a 3-component snack. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends increasing infants' consumption of fruits and veggies. Therefore, USDA added the 3rd component to infant snacks for the older age group. The meal pattern for snacks for the older babies contains 1, breast milk or formula, 2, fruit or vegetable or a combination, and 3, a grain. At snack time, and only at snack time, older infants may be offered other creditable grain items besides the iron-fortified infant cereal, such as ready-to-eat cereals, crackers, breads, etc. And they will credit toward a reimbursable snack. To help you remember, the creditable grain items allowed at snack are listed right on the infant meal pattern. All right, before we move on, let's put our knowledge of the infant meal pattern to the test with a little game. We're going to play a few rounds of meal or no meal and try to figure out if the infant meal shown is creditable or not creditable in the CACFP. Here we've got little baby Betsy. She's 10 months old and she's going to have breakfast. She's been eating a variety of different solids with no issues. She's served toast, mashed peas, and a bottle of iron-fortified infant formula. Is this infant breakfast reimbursable? No. Remember, at mealtime, if you want to serve a grain that credits toward the meal pattern, it has to be the iron-fortified infant cereal. Okay, here we've got baby Bob. He's 8.5 months old, and he's eating a lot of different solid foods. For lunch today, Bob's having breast milk, yogurt, and strawberries. Is this a creditable infant lunch for an 8.5-month-old? Yes. Remember, at mealtime, you can serve iron-fortified infant cereal or the meat alternate. So you can absolutely replace the grain item with a meat alternate item. This is a great option for infants that perhaps won't eat the iron-fortified infant cereal anymore, or whose parents may not want you to serve it on a particular day. Here we have baby Beatrice, who is 11 months old. It's snack time, and she's having some of those infant puffs and some breast milk. We remember from the infant meal pattern that older infants can have other grain items at snack time, and they are creditable. So, is this a creditable infant snack? No. Remember, the snack meal pattern for older infants consists of 3 components: breast milk or formula, a grain, and that fruit and or veggie. So in this case, we're missing that fruit or vegetable component. Okay, baby Bruce is 11 months old, and he's just sitting down to lunch. He's developmentally ready to eat what the older kids have been eating, so he's having formula, tater tots, and a hamburger. Is this lunch reimbursable? Absolutely. Remember, you can serve a grain or a meat alternate or a combination at meal times. The hamburger and cheese credit as the meat alternate component in this meal, so you don't need to serve the iron-fortified infant cereal to meet the meal pattern. In this case, the grain item, which is the hamburger bun, is kind of like an extra item since you've already met the meal pattern with the meat alternate served. Okay, this is the last one. Baby Barbara is 6.5 months old, and she's ready for lunch. She's been kind of constipated lately, so her mom said not to feed her any infant cereal. She's served teething biscuits, carrots, and formula. Is this infant lunch reimbursable? No. As you'll remember, if you're going to serve a grain at meals that credits toward the infant meal pattern, it must be the iron-fortified infant cereal. In this case, you'd either get a doctor's note stating that Barbara cannot have the infant cereal, then it would be okay to serve the alternate grain. You could replace the grain with a meat alternate, or you can serve that, but do not claim it for reimbursement. All right, let's talk about transition time. As infants get older and approach the year-old mark, it's time to transition them from breast milk and formula to whole unflavored cow's milk. USDA allows a transition time of 1 month to switch kids over to cow's milk. It's important to note that USDA allows a child to consume breast milk for literally as long as the parent wishes, and no doctor's note is ever required. However, this is not the case for infant formula. If a parent wants you to continue to serve their child infant formula after the child turns 13 months of age, a doctor's note would be required. So here's a scenario. Susie is 12 months and 13 days old. You've been in the process of transitioning her from iron-fortified infant formula to whole cow's milk. However, today Susie refuses to accept anything but the iron-fortified infant formula. Are her meals and snacks reimbursable today? Absolutely. For a period of 1 month, when children are between the ages of 12 and 13 months, meals containing infant formula may be reimbursed to facilitate the weaning from formula to cow's milk. Now, after Susie turns 14 months old, her dad says she's been really fussy and asks you to start giving her just the iron-fortified infant formula again to see if that will help. Can you do this and claim the meal or snack for reimbursement? No. Meals and snacks containing infant formula that are served to children 13 months of old and older are only reimbursable when supported by a doctor's note. Here's a little different scenario. I have a 1-year-old child that is still being breastfed. Mom is only able to provide me with 2 fluid ounces of breast milk. Can I serve 2 fluid ounces of whole unflavored cow's milk as a supplement to meet the minimum milk requirement? Yes, you can. Remember, Mom can choose to breastfeed for as long as she wishes. No doctor's note required. However, you are still required to meet the meal pattern requirements for that age group. In this case, breast milk and cow's milk are really considered the same quote-unquote milk component. The meal pattern requirement for milk for kids who are ages 1 through 2 is 4 fluid ounces. So absolutely, the 2 fluid ounces of breast milk combined with the 2 fluid ounces of cow's milk bring you to that minimum 4 fluid ounce milk requirement. Next, we're going to talk about the different meal pattern components and specific foods that are creditable and non-creditable for infants in the CACFP. When it comes to grains, remember that if you're going to serve a creditable grain at mealtimes, it must be that iron-fortified infant cereal. Other grain items, such as breads, crackers, and ready-to-eat cereals, only credit toward the meal pattern at snack time. Remember that all cereals served in CACFP must be within the sugar limits. And also note that there is no whole grain rich requirement for infants. Iron-fortified infant cereal is recommended and part of the infant meal pattern because 1, it's easier to digest than ready-to-eat cereals, and 2, iron is essential for infants' healthy growth and brain development. If you're not sure if the brand of infant cereal you offer is iron-fortified, look for the label iron-fortified on the package, or look at the ingredient list for iron. We'll be checking to make sure that you're serving iron-fortified infant cereal when we come out to review your program. I also want to mention here that you should never add infant cereal to a baby's bottle unless instructed to do so by their doctor. Ready-to-eat cereals include flakes, rounds, and puffed cereals that older babies can pick up and eat. Remember, these cereals can only credit toward the meal pattern at snack, not meals. For a ready-to-eat cereal to be creditable at snack time, it must contain no more than 6 grams of sugar per dry ounce of cereal. Nearly all infant cereals meet the sugar limit of 6 grams of sugar per dry ounce. And there are many types of ready-to-eat cereals that meet this sugar limit too. If you're unsure if the cereal you want to purchase is creditable, there are a couple of ways that you can determine this. The first is to use any cereal that is listed on any state agency's WIC-approved food list, or you can use Appendix D, Choose Breakfast Cereals that are lower in added sugars, worksheet on page 145 in the Feeding Infants in the Child and Adult Care Food Program Guide. We've also handed this worksheet out at various trainings that we've had, so it may look familiar to you. Let's take a closer look at this worksheet and walk through the steps. The first step is to use the nutrition facts label to find the serving size of cereal in grams. Next, find the sugars line. Look at the number of grams next to sugars. Then use the serving size identified in step 1 to find the serving size of the cereal in the table. In the table, look at the number to the right of the serving size amount in the sugars column. If the cereal has that amount of sugar or less, then the cereal meets the sugar requirement. These grain items are not creditable in the infant meal pattern. Grain-based desserts, so that includes items like cookies, granola bars, cereal bars, jarred baby food desserts. These items are not creditable at all in CACFP. If we're out on review and we see that you served these items as part of your reimbursable meal or snack, meaning that you expected these items to credit toward the meal pattern, we'll have to disallow all meals and snacks containing those items and may have to reclaim the money you received for serving them. And just as a quick aside, the same would apply to any meals in which you did not serve the iron-fortified infant cereal or the meat alternate. Those meals wouldn't meet the meal pattern, so we would have to disallow those and possibly reclaim the money for those meals served as well. Meats and poultry, including beef, pork, lamb, veal, chicken, and turkey, are creditable in the CACFP infant meal pattern. Like iron-fortified infant cereals, meats and poultry are good first foods for babies because they provide the iron and zinc that babies need starting around 6 months of age. Finfish and shellfish purchased from a commercial source may be offered to babies 6 through 11 months old when they are developmentally ready for solid foods. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, there is no evidence that waiting to introduce common allergens, such as fish or shellfish, beyond 4 to 6 months of age will prevent a food allergy. Any cooked dry beans and peas, such as lentils, black beans, pinto beans, or chickpeas, may be served to babies who are developmentally ready to accept them as well. This also includes canned beans and peas. If you are serving canned beans, it's best practice to look for those that are labeled reduced sodium. You definitely want to make sure to puree or mash beans and peas to avoid choking. Pasteurized cheeses are allowed in the infant meal pattern. If you serve cottage cheese, it has a higher water content than other cheeses, so a 2-ounce serving of cottage cheese is required to make up a 1-ounce equivalent meat alternate serving. When it comes to serving yogurt, store-bought, low-fat, reduced fat, and whole milk yogurts are all creditable in the infant meal pattern. However, to be creditable, yogurt must contain no more than 23 grams of sugar per 6 ounces of yogurt. On page 147 of the Feeding Infants in the Child and Adult Care Food Program Guide, you'll find Appendix E, Choose Yogurts That Are Lower in Added Sugars worksheet. Again, this worksheet probably looks familiar to you as we've handed it out at trainings. The steps you can use to determine if a yogurt has 23 grams of sugar or less per 6 ounces are very similar to those you use to determine the sugars in the ready-to-eat cereal example. You can use the table on the worksheet to compare the serving size in ounces or grams to the amount of sugar in grams. So let's walk through the steps of this worksheet. First, you'll use the nutrition facts label to find the serving size in ounces of the yogurt. Next, you'll look at the sugars line. Look at the number of grams next to sugars. Then you'll use the serving size identified in step 1 to find the serving size of the yogurt in the table. In the table, look at the number to the right of the serving size amount. Again, that would be the sugars column. If the yogurt has that amount of sugar or less, then the yogurt meets the sugar requirement. These are some of the meat alternate food items that are not creditable in the infant meal pattern. So that includes soy products, soy yogurt and tofu. Cheese food, cheese spread, and cheese product are not creditable due to the high sodium and low protein content. You can't serve homemade yogurt in CACFP, must be a commercially prepared product. And commercial frozen yogurt and yogurt bars and freeze-dried yogurt snacks are also not creditable. All vegetables and fruits can be offered to babies. Vegetables and fruits contain important nutrients and fiber. To avoid choking, you should cook and prepare veggies and fruits to the appropriate texture for the baby's feeding skills. Remove all pits, seeds, skins, and peels before serving. And cut vegetables and fruits into thin slices or small pieces no larger than 1/2 inch in size. Fruit or vegetable juices, even if they're 100% juice, are not creditable for infants. In addition, freeze-dried fruit or veggie snacks and just those regular fruit snacks are also not creditable for infants. Now let's talk about jarred, pre-made baby foods that you buy from the store. Many jarred baby foods contain just one item from one of the component groups, like peas or just chicken. However, some jarred baby foods contain more than one food item, like you see in this photo. This is a chicken orzo zucchini baby food, so it's what we call a combination or mixed component food because it's got meat, grain, and vegetables all in one dish. Now, you can't tell just by looking at a jar of baby food how much of each item is in there. So you can't serve just any mixed component baby food. You need to serve one that has a label that tells you how much of each item is in there. In this case, the label tells us that there are 3 tablespoons of vegetables in each jar of food. So you know exactly how much you're offering, and you know that you're meeting meal pattern requirements. The USDA Infant Feeding Guide contains a list at the back of many common creditable and non-creditable foods in the infant meal pattern. The Infant Feeding Guide also has a chapter dedicated to infant food allergies and intolerances. It goes over the definitions of food allergies and intolerances, what to look for in terms of signs of an allergic reaction, and what to do when a baby has a reaction to a food. When it comes to food allergies and intolerances, it's imperative that you be in constant communication with parents and guardians regarding trying new foods and any reactions to foods served. If an infant already has a known or diagnosed food allergy, make sure to have documentation on file as to the foods to be avoided and what to do if the infant has a reaction. If the food causing the allergy can be easily replaced by another food to meet the meal pattern, then a parent note is sufficient. For example, if an infant is allergic to strawberries, you can easily replace the strawberries with another fruit to meet the meal pattern requirements. So a parent note is fine, a doctor's note is not required. However, if the food causing the allergy cannot be replaced to meet the meal pattern, then a doctor's note is required. For example, if an infant cannot tolerate iron-fortified infant cereal, that just can't be easily replaced because that's literally the component of the meal pattern. So a doctor's note would be required in that case. So basically, a medical statement is required anytime you're not meeting the meal pattern and you want to claim that meal or snack for reimbursement. The medical statement or doctor's note should specify the food to be avoided, how the food affects the child, the specific foods that should be substituted, and it should be signed by the medical authority. This note does not need to be on any specific form. It can be on a piece of paper, it could be on a prescription pad, anything like that. If a parent has a special dietary request due to reasons that are not medical, such as personal or religious reasons, it's definitely best practice to try to work with them as much as you can. I mean, that's just good customer service. But depending on the request, you may or may not be able to accommodate it. It will depend on whether or not you can continue to meet the meal pattern. It will depend on the expense related to the request. It could depend on your staffing and or equipment resources, etc. So each situation is different. However, anytime a child is receiving different food from everyone else, you want either a parent or doctor's note on file to explain why, because you don't want it to appear as though there is any discrimination going on in your program. Lastly, we're going to talk about documenting infant feeding. Documentation of infant feeding is a requirement for participation in CACFP because it proves that you're meeting the meal pattern requirements and are therefore eligible to receive financial reimbursement. Personally, I feel like documenting infant feeding is the most complex age group to document due to the differences in developmental readiness and the fact that each infant is often eating something completely different. So, in Maine, your requirements for documenting infant feeding include posting a daily dated infant menu. You need to have written documentation of specific foods served to each infant enrolled in CACFP. And you have to have written documentation of specific amounts of breast milk and formula served to each infant. Now, this information can be documented on one form or more than one form, but you have to document all of this for compliance. Here in Maine, we know that different methods work better for different programs, and we try not to be more stringent than we have to be. We want you to have the flexibility to do what works best for your program. With that in mind, we do not have one specific form that you are required to use to document infant feeding. You can use whichever form or method that works best for your program, but you are responsible for and required to document all of the needed information to prove that you're meeting the meal pattern. If you've created a form to use to document infant feeding, and you're documenting all of the required information, feel free to keep using that form. If you don't have one, we have created a few different forms for documenting infant feeding, which you're welcome to use. And I'm going to go over how to use those different forms that we've created. So the first form that I'm going to talk about is what we refer to as the daily infant sheet. This sheet is for a single infant. We know that a lot of programs like to send information home with parents each day regarding not only the foods that their infant ate, but other info about what they did that day. So we created this form. It's designed to be made into a carbon copy so that you're only filling out the form once, but then you have both a document to keep for your records and a document to send home with families. So we were hoping that it would save you a little bit of time. On the daily infant sheet, you need to record the infant's first and last name, the date, the age group of the infant. You should circle whether the infant was served breast milk or formula. You'll write the amount of breast milk or formula served. You'll write in the specific fruit and or vegetable served, and you'll also write in the specific grain item and or meat alternate item served. Here is a completed daily infant sheet for baby Bill Jones. We document the infant's name, the date, and the infant's age group. We document whether Bill had breast milk or formula, and the amount served. We also need to document the specific solid foods that he was served. Because the serving size for solid foods all start with 0 tablespoons, you do not need to document the amount served. So here's the completed form. If you hang this daily infant sheet each day in a spot where the infant's parents can see it, and you keep a copy for your record, this single document satisfies all of our requirements for documenting infant feeding. Another form that we created to document infant feeding is the infant portion menu for multiple infants. As the name implies, you can document meals and snacks served daily to multiple infants on this one form. This form has the meal pattern with the required serving sizes printed right on it. On this form, you need to document the date, the name of each infant, the infant's age, and the CACFP infant age group that they fall into. Then you'll document the breast milk or formula served, as well as any solid food served to each infant at each meal and snack. Remember that you do need to document the amount of breast milk or formula served to each infant. Here, I indicated whether the infants had breast milk or formula with a B or an F in parentheses. You can indicate this in a different way as long as the information is clear to reviewers. I also wrote in the amount of breast milk or formula that was served to each infant. Notice the entry for the last infant on the sheet. Remember earlier we talked about how for breast milk only, if you know that an infant won't consume the full minimum serving size at one time, you can serve the remainder of the serving size a little bit later and still claim the meal or snack. Again, this is because USDA recognizes the importance of and the time and energy involved in producing breast milk. In this case, the minimum serving size for a 10-month-old infant is 6 to 8 ounces. Little Tiana drank 3 ounces of breast milk at 8 o'clock and then drank another 4 ounces, which now meets the minimum required serving size for breakfast, at 9:30. Because we gave her the full minimum serving size after the second feeding, we can claim her breakfast for reimbursement. You'll also document the specific fruit and/or vegetable served to each infant, as well as the specific grain and/or meat alternate served to each infant. Remember, serving sizes for solid foods start at 0 tablespoons, so you do not have to record the amounts of solid foods served. Now, if you post this menu where the infant parents can see it and keep a copy for your record, then this one form would also satisfy all of the CACFP infant feeding documentation requirements. Lastly, we have the regular infant portion menu. This portion menu is also for recording infant feeding for multiple infants, but it allows you to document infant feeding for a whole week, not just for one day. At the top of the form, you'll record the site name and the date. At the bottom of the form, you'll record each infant's name and age. Notice that each infant is assigned a number, in this case, numbers 1 through 5. If an infant is breastfed on site, you'd put an X by their name. You'll also record what components the parents bring in each day. Next, you'll document all of the different foods to be served to the infants. We're going to document Monday's breakfast for these infants. Let's start with breast milk and formula. On this form, you refer to the specific infants not by name, but by their age group and the number you assigned them at the bottom of the form. So you'll see that baby Bob is infant number 1, Logan is infant number 2, and so on. Documenting infants by number instead of name allows you to fit a lot more information onto one form. First, we'll document the infants that we'll be serving breast milk to. So, Bob, Rohan, and Tiana all consume breast milk. Bob is 3 months old, so he's in the A age group, and he is infant number 1 on the bottom of the form. So this is how we document serving breast milk to Bob. In the row for breast milk or formula, under the line breast milk, we write that we've got 1 infant in the A age group. In parentheses, we write the number of the infant. Now let's document the older infants. Rohan is 7 months old and Tiana is 10 months old, so they are both in the B age group. So we write that there are 2 infants in the B age group drinking breast milk, and they are infants number 4 and 5. Now let's document who's having formula. There's 1 infant drinking formula in the A age group, and that's infant number 3. There's 1 infant drinking formula in the B age group, and that's infant number 2. Next, you'll document the other components that will be served to the infants. You'll do this in the same format as the breast milk and formula. For the fruit and/or vegetable component, you'll document the specific food to be served and the infants that you plan on offering it to. In this case, the infants under 6 months of age are not developmentally ready for solids, so I haven't documented serving solid foods to any of the infants in the A age group. We've only got 3 infants in the B age group eating solids. And because different infants are often eating different foods at different times, you need to document the specific foods offered to each infant. In this case, Logan and Tiana are having pears, and Rohan is having the applesauce his mom brought in. Lastly, you'll record the grain and/or meat alternate to be served to the infants. Again, I'm only going to document for the older infant age group since, in this case, they're the only ones ready for solid foods. So we've got 3 infants in the older B age group. Logan, infant number 2, is having yogurt, and Rohan and Tiana, infants numbers 4 and 5, are going to have rice cereal. This form is not super parent-friendly in terms of ease of reading, but if you did post this menu where parents can see it and keep a copy for your records, then this one form would also satisfy all of the CACFP infant feeding documentation requirements. Of course, you're always welcome to post a prettier menu that's easier for parents to read, as long as it is consistent with the information that's recorded on this menu. So in summary, we've developed 3 different forms that you're welcome to use to document infant feeding. There's the daily infant sheet, the daily infant portion menu for multiple infants, and the weekly infant portion menu for multiple infants. As I mentioned, you don't have to use these specific forms. If you have developed a form which captures all of the information required to document infant feeding, you're welcome to use that instead. Just remember that you need to, 1, post a dated infant menu every day. You need to document specific solid foods served to each infant and the amounts of either breast milk and/or formula served to each infant. And as with all other CACFP documentation, make sure to keep copies of this on file for 3 years plus the current year, because we will be looking at this documentation when we come out to review your program. All right, let's do a little Q&A. Are foods like chicken nuggets, fish sticks, and sausage creditable in the infant meal pattern? The answer is yes. However, they are not recommended due to their high sodium content. In addition, a child nutrition label or product formulation statement is required for these products in order to determine the serving size needed to meet meal pattern requirements. Can solid foods be served to infants younger than 6 months of age? Can I claim those meals and snacks for reimbursement? Is any extra documentation required? Yes, meals containing solid foods are reimbursable when served to infants who are developmentally ready to accept them, even if the infant is younger than 6 months of age. Work closely with infants' parents or guardians regarding developmental readiness for solids. And again, the best practice in this situation would be to obtain a written note from the parent or guardian indicating that solid foods should be served while in care. Can a provider or any other staff member of a child care center or daycare home breastfeed her own infant on site and claim that meal for reimbursement? Absolutely. A center or daycare home provider or any other staff member of a child care center or daycare home may breastfeed her infant on site, and then center or daycare home may claim that meal or snack for reimbursement if the child is enrolled in the CACFP at the center or daycare home. If the center or daycare home is unable to provide a private place for mothers to breastfeed, and the mother chooses to breastfeed in her car, is that meal still reimbursable? I thought this was a very interesting question. The answer is yes. As long as the mother breastfeeds somewhere on the grounds of the daycare center or home, the meal is reimbursable. However, if the mother chooses to leave the premises, then the meal would not be reimbursable. I want to thank you all for joining me for today's webinar. These are some resources I used in creating today's presentation. Again, it's the Feeding Infants in the Child and Adult Care Food Program Guide. It's now available in English and Spanish. There's also a really good USDA memo regarding feeding infants in the CACFP, which I've included here. And certainly if you have any questions about infant feeding, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the other CACFP staff. Thank you again, and have a great afternoon.